In the gloom before dawn, Ludmilla stood at the entrance of the Erantal cemetery. The clinging mists mixed in her vision with the layer of negative energy blanketing the grounds. Here and there, she could see the places where efforts had been made to cleanse and sanctify the area. The city's ongoing efforts to suppress the rise of the undead was questionable at best, as patrols still had to destroy the undead that manifested every night. As close as she was to the miasma floating before her, it seemed to care little for her presence. No blobs of darkness drifted towards her, nor did any tendrils form to reach out in her direction. Puzzled at the lack of a reaction, she walked further into the cemetery, following the earthen path through the gravestones. As she strolled along, the cemetery's layers of negative energy drifted away. "Is this stuff avoiding me?" Ludmilla reached out to wave her hand through a dense patch nearby, but it moved away before she made contact with it. She increased her pace to a run, and the negative energy parted before her like waves before the prow of her boat. At one point, she thought that she had trapped some in a corner, but it simply sank into the ground. She eventually realized what she must have looked like to potential observers, though she doubted anyone would be around. While Ludmilla had a few rumors floating around her and a reputation that seemed to grow in strange directions, adding the idea that she ran around graveyards at night like some crazy person was decidedly not something she wanted. She scanned the area, but only saw a handful of Death Knights dutifully patrolling the grounds. They wouldn't say anything, would they? After making a few more surreptitious attempts at capturing the negative energy around the grounds, she gave up and headed back to the entrance. On the other side of the gate, a pair of figures adorned in black vestments appeared, walking towards the cemetery. "Lady Zaradnik," Themis greeted her. "It's rare to see you here so early in the morning. Actually, I don't think I've seen you here at all. Were you waiting here to see me about something?" Beside the vicar, Sister Alessia nodded respectfully in greeting. It had only been a few days since her arrival, but in that time, Ludmilla thought she had struck up a fast friendship with the paladin from the south. "Vicar Aspasia, I was just..." Ludmilla's voice trailed off. What in the world could she say to explain her presence in the city cemetery before dawn? "Is it about your family, perhaps?" Themis asked. "It's been over half a year since everything happened. If you'd like to talk about it." As a cleric of Sursana, a portion of Themis' duties revolved around preparing the elderly for the end of life and helping the bereaved work through their loss. Ludmilla's people had a different approach to grief in the passing of loved ones, but Themis might have taken it as her avoiding the issue. "No, I was just investigating something." "Investigating something, in the cemetery?" Ludmilla? Ludmilla, are you there?" Lady Shiltier's message sounded in her head. Ludmilla raised her hand to her ear, trying her best not to look visibly relieved. "Yes, my lady." "Where's your boat at the moment?" "My boat? It should be arriving at the harbour in Warden's Vale within the next hour or so." "Good. We're going." "Going?" The black surface of a gate split the air. Alessia placed herself between the portal and Themis, eyeing it warily. "Duty calls?" Themis asked. "I have no idea what it's calling me for," Ludmilla answered. They waited for several moments, but no one appeared. Eventually, the top half of Lady Shiltier popped out of the portal. "Good morning, Lady Shal." Lady Shiltier reached out to take Ludmilla by the wrist, yanking her into the portal. Ludmilla found herself surrounded by the familiar scenery of Warden's Vale. A half-dozen vampire brides scurried about, stacking bags and crates on the pier. "May I know what is going on, my lady?" Her liege's chin turned up proudly. Ludmilla detected a hint of excitement in her voice. "I have a date with Lord Ainz." Lady Shiltier emphasized date with an especially pleased note. Ludmilla glanced around them again. "You have my congratulations, my lady," she said. "But what does this all have to do with your date? And you mentioned my ship." "Why, it's a river date, of course," Lady Shiltier replied. "A romantic trip through the Katsa Plains. Just Lord Ainz, myself and our attendants. They'll all be undead, of course." "I see. How long will you be spending together with His Majesty?" "Together with Lord Ainz." Her liege wrapped her arms around herself and started to wriggle in place, swept up in some fantasy. Ludmilla looked over to one of the vampire brides, waving her over. "How long will this trip be for?" she whispered. "His Majesty wishes to explore the Katsa Plains," the vampire bride replied, so it will take as long as it takes. Explore, so it's not a date? Of course it's a date, Lady Shiltia snapped out of whatever she was imagining. I mentioned who will be going, yes? Lord Ainz does not wish for any of the living to interfere with his journey by attracting droves of the undead wherever we go. Yuri is busy preparing for something important, which leaves just us. Ludmilla and the vampire bride watched Lady Shiltia's finger move back and forth authoritatively as she spoke. Didn't His Majesty have thousands of powerful undead servitors? How did it boil down to Lady Shiltia and her attendants? Ludmilla supposed that it was none of her business, but her boat was. If you'll be using my only ship, my lady, she said, how will I move goods back and forth? Just let the vampire bride know what you need to transfer, Lady Shiltia replied. We have a few new frost dragons in the city, so they can perform deliveries while getting used to how things work. There's a lot of cargo that's far too heavy for the frost dragons to move. I can gate those, Lady Shiltia told her. Nothing must get in the way of this date, Ludmilla. Of course, my lady, Ludmilla lowered her head. Thank you for your consideration. The familiar sight of her ship sailing upriver drew closer. Lady Shiltia's attendants started to unpack the things they had brought with them. They were items one might expect to prepare a ship for a long journey downriver: replacement boards, nails, tools for refurbishing the vessel, pails of varnish and... Ludmilla's lips turned down into a frown, which deepened as more articles were withdrawn from their containers. There were luxurious fabrics, expensive-looking bottles of what she suspected was blood, ebony tables, an exquisite sofa and piles of silken cushions. My lady. What is all this for? It's not like you to ask rhetorical questions. 4 vampire brides unrolled a long roll of pitch-black cloth. Dominating its center was a giant pink heart. What is this, my lady? It's a sail, of course. What else could it be? Glancing over everything arrayed before them, Ludmilla tried to imagine what the Nar would look like after Lady Shiltia was done with it. Several buckets of paint appeared. You're painting the ship? It will look wonderful, no? How many people know about this excursion? The others know that Lord Ainz will be going on a journey, Lady Shiltia said. Only I know the details, however. He left explicit instructions that he was not to be disturbed. Was this something that happened often? A sovereign leaving the comfort and security of their nation to explore the unknown with a small entourage might be a common tale that the masses enjoyed, but it felt like an unnecessary risk in reality. Both His Majesty and Lady Shiltia were unfathomably powerful, but according to Lady Shiltia's accounts of her past, she had often come to blows with other, unfathomably powerful beings. Considering the nature of such extraordinary entities, one would think they could appear anywhere, at any time without warning. There should be some surveillance at least, divination magic, or use of a mirror of remote viewing. His Majesty uses a ring of non-detection, so they won't be able to see him. But they will see everything around him? Including the boat? Yes, they will. A cold smile played over Lady Shiltia's face. Ooh, I should equip one as well. Even if that gorilla tries to spy on us, what Lord Ainz and I are doing will be concealed from her. She'll only be able to gnash her teeth in frustration as she tries to imagine what's going on. Are you sure this is wise? Lady Shiltia peered up at her, crimson eyes glowing in the shadows cast by the mountains across the river. Aren't you supposed to be on my side? I am yours, my lady, Ludmilla replied, and I am happy for your feelings. I know how you become when it comes to His Majesty, however. As your loyal servant, I believe I should be supporting you by trying to ensure that your date goes off without incident. On that note, how will His Majesty feel about your arrangements? What do you mean? I'm probably the furthest thing from an expert on romance, but I feel that appearing one-sidedly absorbed one's own desires would be extremely off-putting. I don't know much about His Majesty, either, but considering his expectations for this journey seems prudent. Lady Shiltia bit her thumb, making a vexed noise as she furrowed her brow in thought. She really had allowed her fantasies to carry her away. Sharing in her feelings, Ludmilla couldn't quite blame her for doing so. If it is allowed, Ludmilla asked, could you share the details of this excursion, my lady? It may be possible to strike a balance between His Majesty's objectives and your desire to grow closer to him. Why you think so? I can't offer any guarantees, but we can at least try. Well, all right, Lord Ainz wishes to explore the Katsa Plains. Things will get busy with the autumn harvest, so he's made time for it between now and then. I have been selected as his escort since we'll be able to relax and go around without attracting all of the undead in the place. Even if the Sorcerer King was one of the undead, a sovereign randomly going out to wander around an undead-infested wasteland still struck Ludmilla as odd. Is there an objective for this exploration? Not that I know of, Lady Shaltir told her. Our master's designs are truly unfathomable and grand in their scope, so I cannot say what purpose he might have for this journey. As his loyal servant, I am already filled with joy to be chosen as his escort. As usual, it appeared that the Sorcerer King's motives were beyond her ability to perceive. One may as well try to discern the will of the gods. Ludmilla frowned as she realized that she was trying to do just that. She shelved the notion and decided to see to Lady Shaltir's end of things. How does the ship factor into everything? She asked. One would think that better ways to travel exist for such an esteemed personage. The boat was my idea. Lady Shaltir pressed her fingertips together. It's the perfect opportunity, no? The Katsa River runs through the plains, so we can relax and enjoy the journey in close quarters. If Lord Ainz wishes to investigate something, we can anchor the boat and head out. It wasn't a bad idea. The ship could act as a base camp of sorts. Turning it into an opportunity to happily spend time together with His Majesty would probably not feel overbearing as long as Lady Shaltir's endeavors were not too unreasonable. What else do you have in mind? I plan on using the ship to tour parts of the transportation network that haven't received much attention in the reports. Lord Ainz might be pleased with our progress. Ludmilla straightened in alarm, looking around at her far from complete harbour. The future city was still a small cluster of buildings over an island of bare stone, and most of the construction planned for the citadel was non-existent. Does that mean His Majesty is coming here? Do you take issue with that? We've barely done anything here, Ludmilla said. It's more nothing than something. How about sticking to Kowloon Harbour? Construction there is effectively completed, and it looks quite impressive. Most of the river transportation network will be in Clara's County, anyway. Are you sure? Yes, my lady. Well, if you insist, have you come up with any ideas for the boat? Ludmilla licked her lips. Hopefully, Lady Shaltir would be accommodating to her recommendations. The sail is definitely a no-go. Her liege made a loud, disappointed noise. It's too much, my lady, Ludmilla said. It even has frills and streamers, and that giant pink heart. Anyway, since His Majesty will be present, it would be more appropriate to display the emblem of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. We already have a flag for the mast, but we can bring a couple of spare banners along as well. What else? Fixing up the ship is fine, but there isn't any need to paint it over. Turning the entire thing black will transform it into an oven for passengers. As for the furnishings, we can do away with most of them. The ship is large, but so many pieces will crowd the deck. Lady Shaltir reached out and started tugging at Ludmilla's dress. Why, you're taking everything away, Ludmilla, her eyes turned teary. At this rate, it'll just be the ship. It's supposed to be a romantic journey, romantic. The canopy and seating arrangements should be fine. Really? It's the key point in your strategy, yes? Ensuring that His Majesty has a comfortable journey, and that you have a place close to him. Any other time, His Majesty will be out exploring the area, so these other modifications will be superfluous. You should be focusing your efforts on the place where you will be spending time together on the ship. Her liege blinked several times, then she nodded energetically. Yes, that's exactly right. What was I thinking? I'm glad you caught all of that. Lady Shaltir turned and walked over to the vampire brides, hurriedly issuing new instructions. The ship arrived at the pier, and the Death Warrior captain stepped off to walk up to her. It slowly gazed out over the items spread out everywhere, then turned to Ludmilla with a questioning look. You have a special job ahead of you, Captain, Ludmilla said. His Majesty will be using this vessel to travel downriver and explore the Katsa Plains. The captain threw up its hands in shock, and its hat nearly fell off. A second passed before it turned on its heel and animatedly issued orders to the skeleton crew. The undead crewmen and nearby Death Knights scrambled to unload the vessel and begin their preparations. Several hours later, the newly refurbished boat rested on the shore, its fresh coat of varnish drying in the sun. Nearby, Lady Shaltir was trying out the 6th iteration of her seating arrangements. A closed canopy fashioned with heavy black fabric and crimson frills covered a red sofa that looked half a throne. At its feet, the silken cushions were arranged in a pile. "Why are the cushions on the floor?" Ludmilla asked. "That's where I'll be sitting," Lady Sheltier replied. "Shouldn't you be sitting beside His Majesty?" "It's more appropriate for me to be at his feet, yes? I can drape myself over Lord Ainz's legs and he can stroke my hair, or maybe he'll use me as a footstool? Or maybe I can be the seat again?" Again? Panting filled the air as Lady Sheltier's excitement rose. Ludmilla could almost imagine the pink haze floating around her liege's head. "Oh, I have this too." Lady Sheltier reached into her inventory, producing a black iron collar with a heavy length of chain. Her cheeks grew flushed as she stared down at it, and then she looked up at Ludmilla. "Maybe I should get you one too, just in case you need it?" "I'm afraid to ask why I would need this." "It's a collar, so." A metallic click sounded as Lady Sheltier closed the collar around her slender neck. She went over to the throne, placing the chain on top of the seat while she lay down seductively on the cushions. "Something like this," Lady Sheltier told her. "Lord Ainz will be holding the chain, of course. Isn't it wonderful?" Ludmilla scanned the harbour, fervently hoping that none of her subjects was around to witness the scandalous sight. Seeing only undead servitors, she turned her attention back to Lady Sheltier. "Are you sure this is something His Majesty would want?" "Even if it isn't," Lady Sheltier said, "I will do anything His Majesty desires. I'm fairly certain you fancy this sort of thing as well." "I have no idea how you could come to that conclusion, my lady." A salacious smile crept onto her liege's lips. "Because it fits your character? Also, the way your faith operates seems to lend you towards this sort of thing." Lady Sheltier stretched herself out over the cushions, her back arching in an enticing curve. "Your tenets encourage you to seek those who will beget superior offspring upon you." Lady Sheltier jingled the chain attached to the collar. "Since you're the fighting sort, it would be to breed with the strong, yes? Submission to those who can best you. To be dominated and ravished by a worthy partner is your deepest desire." Ludmilla's mouth fell open, she felt a flush creeping up her neck. She turned her gaze away from Lady Sheltier's lewd smile. "I knew it," her liege said. "That's a horrible way to interpret things," Ludmilla protested. "And why do you think I would need a collar right at this moment, or ever?" "Why," Lady Sheltier told her, "it's because you're coming with us too." "Me?" Ludmilla squeaked. "I believe I left no room for misinterpretation." I can't." "Of course you can." "Please, my lady," Ludmilla begged, "you know what happens to me when I'm exposed to His Majesty's presence. I won't be able to bear this." Ludmilla felt herself slowly warming up as the memory of her first encounter with the Sorcerer King stirred the feelings that she had bottled tightly away. "It's a given that His Majesty is magnificent to behold," Lady Sheltier told her, "but as one of His Majesty's nobles, you can't avoid him for eternity. This excursion is going to come to a premature end because one of His Majesty's nobles flooded his transport." Lady Sheltier's lips twitched up into a smile. "That might be interesting to see," she said, "but in all seriousness, you need to get used to it. I've already introduced all of your friends to Lord Ainz. It would hardly do for you to be left out. I can't blame you for the results of your first encounter, but a servant of His Majesty must be able to maintain her composure around him, yes?" "I have no idea how I'll be able to do that." "I'll be there with you," Lady Sheltier said. "We'll figure something out. If all else fails, I will be more than happy to help you calm down." Lady Sheltier's crimson gaze glowed brightly as she licked her lips. Ludmilla sighed, there was no escape. "I will do what I can, my lady." Immune. In the glittering chambers of the guild treasury, Ainz Ulgaun sifted through cabinets filled with data crystals. "Why are they arranged like this? Did we really have so many of these?" For some reason, the data crystals in the cabinets, while neatly sorted, all conferred effects that undead were immune to. He went from cabinet to cabinet, trying to figure out where everything else had gone. Negative energy damage, level drain, attribute damage, poison, disease, confusion, fear, paralysis, curse. Puzzled, he stood back from his search. "I guess I have to call that guy Pandora's actor. Ainz Summer. I am overjoyed too. I've been looking through the mid-level data crystals in the treasury, but it looks like everything's been reorganized. Ah, that was me. I was sorting them by order of utility for this new world, then I thought it would be convenient if I arranged our stored materials that way. We have a tremendous supply of data crystals of that nature, and the vast majority of the peoples in the region are susceptible to their effects. I was hoping to gain your permission to configure new pieces of equipment. It was exactly the reason Ainz was in the treasury, except he was headed to a place where everything would be immune to those effects. Swept up in his excitement over visiting the mysterious Katsa plains, he had decided to put together various items to test on the plentiful undead there. By doing so, he could conduct an in-depth comparison of this world's mechanical systems to those of Yggdrasil. Perhaps he would uncover previously unknown weaknesses or advantages possessed by the undead, and thus himself. After he had completed his study, he figured that he could give the items to the Adventurer Guild as powerful showpieces to boost their appeal to the masses. He could even market them as rune-crafted equipment if he could find the right item frames. Ainz turned his attention back to the message. Out of curiosity, what did you have planned for that equipment? Powerful showpieces for the Adventurer Guild, after personally testing them out, of course. We could place them in the point catalog to give them something to aim for and boost their appeal to the masses. Since the data crystals utilized are all of the same nature, they should be extremely potent in the hands of our adventurers while presenting a minimal threat to the Sorceress Kingdom should they somehow be lost or turned against us. Well, it's not a bad idea. Just don't make them too easy to obtain. Where did you put the other data crystals? The ones that are effective against undead targets. Shall I return to the treasury to guide you, Ainz? No, it's fine. Just tell me where they are. He followed Pandora's actor's directions, making his way deeper into the treasury. It wasn't long until he found what he was looking for. Demiurge should be getting started soon. I think he predicted that Roble would send a delegation to us a few months after that. Should I prepare some holy weapons for them? It might get me on their good side. In his time exploring the New World, one thing Ainz had learned was that the people here had a hefty appetite for magic items. Even those that would be considered low tier in Yggdrasil easily swayed hearts and minds. Cosmetic effects that ultimately did nothing could awe and overwhelm the sensibilities of veteran adventurers and experienced craftsmen alike. Still, there was probably a limit to how far he could go. If a sword did nothing but glow, people would figure out how useless it was eventually. Holy, good, light, fire, acid. Should I throw in some attribute bonuses? Resistances? What sort of metals should I use for the frame? I wonder how much star silver we have stockpiled. Using a little bit wouldn't hurt. As he wandered around picking up crafting materials, Ainz discovered that there was less star silver than he expected, so he decided against using it. His bony hand drifted over a pile of scarletite bars. No, that's probably overkill. All of the undead I've run into would be instantly vaporized by the touch of a scarletite weapon. Ainz sighed over his conundrum. He naturally wanted to make the most effective weapons possible, but it was an unreasonable use of materials that they still had no way to replace. As far as he knew, alloys fashioned from adamantite were the best that this world had to offer. He reframed his thinking and tried to figure out what sort of items he could create with the data capacity of an item frame fashioned from adamantite. In the end, he still picked up far more than he had initially intended to use. Well, that's just how it is, I guess. Let's have some fun with this. Next, he would need to head to the Great Library of Ashurbanipal and browse through Nazarik's collection of item frame data. Once he was done there, he would have the blacksmith NPC. No, it would be better to have Pandora's actor use Amanoma Hitotsu's form to craft everything. On his way out of the treasury, an item sticking out of a nearby pile of gold coins caught his attention. This is a bow? Ainz reached out and pulled it from the pile. Oh, it has one of those item frames that could pass for having runes. Lucky. A praise all magic item. Ultimate Shooting Star Super, who came up with this name? No, this is just the kind of ridiculous naming that the people around here seem to love. I wonder who left this here. Was it something one of us used when we were lopies? A wave of melancholy passed over him as he delved into his memories of Yggdrasil. He could tell right away that it wasn't something a dedicated archer like Peroncino would have used. Its data allocation was far too haphazard. It was more like a stat stick. Beyond that, Ainz had no clue who it might have belonged to. In all likelihood, it was a cheap pickup or even a hand-me-down. Melee types would use weapons like this as a ranged option in situations where they couldn't get in close to their targets or needed to pull mobs from a distance. The name was probably an attempt to entice prospective customers to buy it. Still, it could be used here. More than that, it was probably a bow more powerful than anything that the people of the region had ever seen. He nodded to himself, tossing the weapon into his inventory before teleporting out of the treasury. Yosh. After spending far too much time working with Pandora's actor to optimize all of his rune-crafted weapons, Ainz made some last-minute checks of his inventory and equipment. Anticipation welled up within him as he walked out of Nazarick and cast message. Shiltir. Yes, Ainz Summer? Shiltir's reply was a mix of tension and excitement, but it was probably for completely different reasons from his own. Ainz cleared his throat. My preparations are complete. How are things on your end? All has been prepared, Ainz Summer. We are ready to depart at your order. Shall I open a gate for you? We should be on our way. Thank you for your hard work. The portal of Shiltir's gate opened before him, and he stepped through into an unfamiliar place. It then occurred to Ainz that he didn't know where Shiltir had prepared for their departure. Before he could attempt to get his bearings, her silvery voice chimed through the air as the gate closed behind him, announcing the arrival of His Majesty, the Sorcerer King. He stood facing an artificial waterfront with several channels. Cargo cranes stood over a multitude of berths. Rows of warehouses were arrayed behind him and a bridge ran overhead on tall stone columns. Across the water to the south, a line of towers connected by a massive wall blocked his view. Your Majesty, a familiar voice drew his attention to the side. Welcome to Kowloon Harbour. A tall noblewoman adorned in cobalt and silver spread her skirts out in an elegant curtsy before him. Behind her, a row of attendants lowered their heads in unison. Countess Kowloon, he replied with a regal nod. Your work never ceases to impress. I believe the last time I was here, there was only the highway and an old bridge over the river. All this was made possible through the cooperation of many, Countess Kowloon replied. Your human subjects, the members of the royal court, undead servitors, dwarven architects, engineers and masons. It is an achievement shared by all of us, and otherwise impossible if not for your Majesty's vision of a harmonious realm. A genuine smile filled his skeletal expression. Excellent. Excellent, Kowloon Dono. This is exactly the sort of thing I desire to see in the Sorceress Kingdom. His Majesty permits you to raise your heads, Shiltir said from beside him. As one, Countess Kowloon and her retinue rose to face him. The young noblewoman beamed radiantly at his praise. An aura in Ainz's arcane vision drew his attention to a middle-aged man standing behind the Countess' right shoulder. He wore a black and silver tabard over enchanted plate mail. His shield, weapon and accessories all glowed faintly with magical power. Ainz couldn't say that it was weak by Yggdrasil standards. If the man was around level 20, his equipment would be considered level appropriate. The entire panoply had a uniform quality that greatly overshadowed what was used by elites of the Empire's First Legion. All things considered, it suggested that he had come from a nation far more advanced than the Baharuth Empire, at least from a military standpoint. A new member of your retinue, Kowloon Dono? Ah, allow me to introduce you. Countess Kowloon turned and gestured towards the man. Captain Marcus Cavallaro, from the slain theocracy. He is the leader of the paladins assisting with temple duties in Kowloon County. Your Majesty, the paladin captain offered a crisp salute. I am humbled to stand in your presence. Not bad. If this is what a paladin captain is like, we shouldn't have any problems working with the Holy Kingdom. He seems like a perfectly reasonable fellow. Welcome to the Sorceress Kingdom, Cavallaro Dono. Please extend my greetings to the rest of your subordinates, and thank them for their efforts here. It is an honor to serve, Your Majesty. Ainz's gaze ran over the paladin captain, Countess Kowloon, and her attendants. Beyond them, he could see a number of warehouse workers loading wagons drawn by soul-eaters. Unlike the vast majority of citizens in Nirantal, they did not shy away from his scrutiny or flee from his presence. Instead, they seemed to straighten under his gaze and redouble their efforts. I've been working for months to get the people in the city to warm up to me. This is my first time in this new town, yet everyone is acting almost normally. He wondered why this was. Was it because of Countess Kowloon, The influence of some skill or ability that was a part of her build? Or was it something else? It would be nice if he could have the people in the Erantle acting the same way. "I hear you have a grand adventure awaiting you, Your Majesty," Countess Corlin said. "Please do not hold yourself back on our account." Ainz froze for a moment, then his soft chuckle filled the air. "My anticipation was that obvious." "It does sound rather exciting." The Countess smiled slightly, "and Lady Shiltier's energy has been quite infectious." "Well, I can hardly deny what you say. Thank you for your warm reception, Corlin Dono." "Your servant is honored." Countess Corlin lowered her head. "Please enjoy your time together with Lady Shiltier. We look forward to your safe return, Your Majesty." Something about the Countess' parting words seemed off, but Ainz was too excited to get going to think about it. His gaze settled on the single ship in the harbour. After examining it carefully from a distance, he breathed a sigh of relief. He half expected Shiltier to have turned it into a painfully conspicuous affair with hearts and streamers and all manner of romantic imagery. Save for what he assumed to be his seat, which seemed out of place with the rest of the vessel, everything else appeared quite normal. At least Albedo won't come flying down in a fit of jealous rage. He checked the skies above, just in case. The early autumn air was crisp and clear of any clouds. Aside from the occasional Elder Lich patrol flying overhead, there was little else of note. "So this is our transportation?" "Yes, Ainz Summer," Shiltier's voice rose from his elbow. "Does it please you, aren't you?" The crimson points of his eyes ran over the humble vessel, its mended sail, fluttering banner, and carefully maintained hull. A death warrior wearing a dark bicorn stood at the tiller and a crew of skeleton warriors manned its oars. 6 vampire brides were lined up before the gangplank. They bowed deeply as he approached. It has an adventurous feeling to it," he replied. "You have done well, Shiltier. Why, your servant is unworthy of your praise, aren't you?" A pretty blush appeared over her cheeks, and she turned her gaze away to fidget in silence. Ainz boarded the ship, making his way towards the stern where a rich black carpet led from the edge of the hull to the canopied seat. The walls of the canopy were rolled up, providing an unobstructed view of the surroundings. The skeleton warriors saluted crisply as he walked by, and the death warrior prepared for their departure as he took his seat. It was then that he noticed another figure standing at the bow of the ship, a tall woman with long, chestnut hair. She held a longbow in her left hand, and her attention appeared entirely focused on the channel ahead. Ainz thought he might have seen her somewhere before, but turned away from him as she was, he couldn't be sure. He glanced to his side, where Shiltier stood near to his armrest. She had changed out of her black ballroom gown and was now in her crimson plate mail. The point of her pipette lance gleamed from where it stuck out from under the shadows of the canopy. "Shiltier," he said as the ship was released from its moorings and started to drift forward, "who is that standing at the front there?" "A local noblewoman who became my vassal," Shiltier replied. "Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik. This gnar that we're using belongs to her, aren't you?" Ainz raised a hand to stroke his chin. "Zaradnik," he murmured, "where have I heard that name before?" "Ah, the noble who joined the Adventurer Guild. If I recall correctly, she had a previously unknown skill, but she lost it." The image of Pandora's actor in the woman's form flashed through his mind. He cringed at the memory of his attempted activation of the skill. By its description alone, Ainz thought it was something that Touch Me would have latched onto immediately. "She has since regained it, Ainz Summer," Shiltier said. "Baroness Zaradnik also has quite a number of accomplishments to her name. She was the first local leader to embrace undead labor, and her work in their implementation has provided crucial data to the administration, aren't you? The resolution of the issues in Facet County was also spearheaded by her. She has been invaluable in many other things, assisting in the establishment and ongoing development of the Sorceress Kingdom's transportation network, leading and training contingents of the Royal Army and laying the foundations for institutions involved in magical research, education and the integration of magical technologies in the lives of the citizens. As an adventurer, she has advanced to mithril rank and serves as both a proctor and trainer for the guild. She was also instrumental in bringing the Frost Giants to our side, and her territory has not just humans, but the various demi-human races living peacefully together." Ainz nodded slowly as Shiltier listed off achievement after achievement. His gaze drifted back to the woman far to the front. "Who is this superwoman?" It occurred to him that this noblewoman had not come to present herself at his arrival, nor when he had boarded the vessel. However, the out-of-place behavior was swept aside by the sheer number of notable accomplishments she had left in her wake. How is it that I haven't heard of any of this? Albedo's doing, most likely, Sheltier replied. Baroness Zaradnik is my vassal, so her achievements would be counted as my own, Arinsuka. At best, her results have been distilled into statistics in those dreadful reports of hers. He frowned at the notion. Would Albedo do that? He knew how competitive she could be, especially when it came to her rivalry with Sheltier. Then again, Albedo was almost universally disdainful of outsiders, often equating them to livestock only valued for what they could yield for Nazarick, so the latter was just as likely. Though he couldn't be certain of the reason why Baroness Zaradnik's feats hadn't received any apparent recognition, it still seemed terribly unfair for an individual who had achieved so much. Has she been properly compensated for her work? He asked. She's quite humble, Arinshu, Sheltier answered, and rarely shows her desire for anything. The Baroness is content in performing her duties, developing her territory and ensuring her people are well cared for. I have offered her a few things, to varying degrees of success. This sounds suspiciously similar to Countess Corlin. They're childhood friends. The two of them are very close, Arinshu. Sheltier's lips turned up suggestively at the last. Ainz loudly cleared his throat. Everything else aside, he said, is there a purpose to her being here? You mentioned something about wanting to discuss the future of the transportation network. Yes, Ainz Summer, Sheltier replied. I feel that our efforts in the south haven't received as much attention as they should. There is tremendous untapped potential ready to be harnessed here, according to Countess Corlin. I see, Ainz nodded thoughtfully. I suppose she'll be getting off before we enter the Katsa Plains. Forgive my presumption, Ainz Summer, but I thought it better that she accompany us for the entire journey. Won't that draw unwanted attention from the undead? That shouldn't be the case, Sheltier said. She is also undead, after all. Ainz peered at Baroness Zaradnik's back as the Death Warrior captain expertly guided their vessel towards the locks at the eastern end of the harbour. One of his goals for exploring the Katsa Plains was to find a native undead being who possessed true intelligence, yet that goal had somehow been checked off of the list before leaving the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Wasn't she a human when Pandora's actor was investigating her class build? Just what in the world happened to her? He glanced over at Sheltier, then looked back towards the Baroness again. Did Sheltier turn her? He had left explicit instructions with the NPCs that the citizens of the Sorcerer's Kingdom were not to be harmed without proper justification. Maybe the noblewoman had been convinced or some bargain had been struck between. Turning the Baroness would secure a proven talent in perpetuity without needing to consume a race change item. Ainz couldn't see her eyes, but she didn't have the pale complexion of a vampire. In fact, she appeared to be nothing more than a human. His undead blessing didn't react to her presence, nor did she give off any other signs of being undead. Does the new harbour please you, Ainz Summer? Sheltier's question jarred him out of his thoughts. He scanned their surroundings for a point to discuss. It's quite expansive, he said after a moment, but there is a distinct lack of ships. I assume that it won't look so empty in the future. Corlin Harbour and Warden's Vale are the only ports on the river at the moment, Aransuka, but Countess Corlin plans to create a network of harbours that will connect every settlement with access to navigable waters. Baroness Zaradnik's expansion of Warden's Vale also means that traffic between her territory and Countess Corlin's will increase greatly. You mentioned something about magical research and technology. That's right, Sheltier nodded. It's been noted that, as a former territory of Riestais, the average citizen is not very knowledgeable when it comes to magic. If anything, views on magic are either grounded in superstition or outright derisive, aren't you? We are known as the Sorcerer's Kingdom, ruled by the Sorcerer King, so it must seem a farce to any visitors from abroad. There is a one-sided dependency on the Empire, a protectorate, for imports of magical items. Baroness Zaradnik deems it an unacceptable state of affairs, and has resolved to remedy matters. Sheltier's words stabbed at him like so many jagged spears. Though Nazarick had acquired an entire duchy, its former nation of Riestais had invested next to nothing when it came to its magical institutions. Thus, what they had inherited was an empty shell of a magician guild and a handful of similarly vacated trade guilds. The local temples focused on ministering to the people and did not have any noteworthy magic item production. While the land of the duchy was fertile and ideal for forestry and agriculture, it was like a barren wasteland where a handful of dried weeds grew when it came to magic. Ainz had enlisted the help of Fluda Paradine in overseeing magic item production, but the reality was that the ratio of magic casters in the duchy was pitiful and ignorance on magical matters was rampant. Even the Empire's renowned archmage could not force a population of magic crafters to spring forth from nothing. The newly situated runesmiths helped little in this regard, as they used a system unique to their craft. By comparison, the Empire had both magic and military academies with generations of established tradition. An entire ministry existed to develop, promote and regulate arcane magic. The Imperial Legions had integrated both arcane and divine magic casters into their ranks, and the citizens of the Empire generally enjoyed a higher standard of living due to its hard-earned institutional development and progressive government policies. Placing his new nation and the Empire side by side, Ainz was left at a loss as to how he could turn the tables. Quite frankly, it was an impossible situation where one would throw their hands up in defeat after a single glance. Things seemed even worse now that the Empire was a client state of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. He could only hope that the raw might displayed by his undead armies had people assumed that the Sorcerer's Kingdom was an incalculably advanced state and that what they otherwise saw was simply due to the lands recently being a part of Reistize. Little had he known that someone was actually tackling the problem. Their vessel entered one of the locks, and Ainz watched the walls rise high overhead as the water level fell. The outer gate opened, releasing them into the river. He craned his neck up at the massive bastion on their starboard side. The island it was built on rose about 40 meters above the water, and the walls added another 10 to that. The fortifications of Castle Corlin were Baroness Saradnik's design, as well. Shiltir gazed up at the wall with him. There is an eyrie here for our frost dragons, and between the fortress island, the 2 army bases in Corlin harbour and the town's fortifications, over 1 million Death Knights can be stationed here. Shiltir described her as humble, but moderation doesn't seem to be in this woman's vocabulary. How many centuries would it take me to summon that many Death Knights? If this was a result of her influence, Ainz muttered, I wonder what she has in store for her own territory. Cocytus has already approved her proposal to create a major military installation there, Shiltir said. It will not only be for the undead, but also for the living citizens who join the army. According to her projections, Warden's Vale will be a small city in several generations. Once again, he wondered how this noble woman had eluded his notice. That she was now an undead being with a limitless lifespan could be considered an incredible stroke of luck. I'm curious about one thing, he said. How did she end up as one of the undead? Was it not Ainz Summer's doing, Arinsuka? Me? How could it possibly be me? Never mind doing anything to her, I've only met her once for less than 5 minutes while acting as Moman. Did the Baroness believe that he was responsible, as well? A noble would normally introduce themselves to their sovereign at the first available opportunity. He glanced at Shiltir, who was looking over at him. Confusion over his question was evident on her face. Is that something she believes? He asked. Like Countess Corlin, Shiltir answered, Baroness Saradnik is a follower of the 6 great gods, aren't you? She believes that the god of death holds purview over the souls of humanity, and, without her god's permission, it is impossible that she could rise as one of the undead. Ainz turned his head away, watching the walls of Corlin harbour drift by on the northern shore. Could it be that the Baroness believed that he was her religion's god of death? Many of the demi-human tribes in the great forest of Tob and the Azalizia mountains saw him in that light already, regularly offering tributes in his name. Wait a minute. If she's close friends with Countess Corlin, does that mean they both believe I'm a god? Is that why they work so hard? What about their subjects, do they all believe the same thing? What should he say? If he denied the connection, would they lose their motivation? Would the substantial rate of progress in the Southern Territories grind down to nothing? Things could even fall apart. If he neither confirmed nor denied it, they would probably continue to believe and advance the cause of the Sorceress Kingdom. What was the chance that their belief would become the source of problems in the future? Religion is terrifying. Then again, if he looked at it from another angle, the citizenry in Corlin harbour conducted themselves favorably in his presence compared to those in Erantle. Even Captain Cavallaro, a newcomer to the Sorceress Kingdom, felt like he would be an easy person to get along with. Ultimately, however, He did not understand how the people of this world viewed a god. He had never entered a temple or listened to a sermon. In addition, he held preconceptions from earth of religions giving rise to fanatics, extremists and irrational zealots. According to Pandora's Actors research, it was highly likely that more than a few of the gods worshipped in this world were players from the distant past. If he were in their shoes, there's no way I would demand to be worshipped as a god, placed on a pedestal or anything like that. I can't even handle the NPCs acting that way. He tapped his skeletal fingers on the polished armrest of his seat. Why was he thinking himself in circles? The answer was probably right in front of him. Bring her to me. By your command, Ainz. Shiltir stepped out from under the canopy, rose from the deck and flew over to the baroness. He couldn't hear them over the sound of the wind in the river, but they spoke with animated gestures that gave him a vague idea of what passed between them. Until he had no idea what passed between them. Eh? Why is Shiltir holding out a collar? What's going on? Baroness Zaradnik's eyes widened, and she shook her head violently. After an energetic back and forth, the noble woman finally relented. She knelt before Shiltir and tilted her chin up, exposing her neck. Shiltir leaned forward and snapped the collar on, then reached into her inventory to produce a square of black cloth. Shiltir folded the cloth and tied it around the young noblewoman's head in a blindfold. The baroness rose again, tentatively placing one foot in front of another as Shiltir tugged on her collar. Ainz watched, aghast, as Shiltir brought the chained, collared and blindfolded noblewoman before him. When they stepped into the shade of the canopy, Baroness Zaradnik silently lowered herself to a knee. The end of the heavy chain was offered to him. He stared at it blankly. Shiltir. Yes, Ainz. Would you care to explain why you've brought her before me like this? It's a precaution, or a countermeasure? A precaution. Does it have to do with her current state? Yes, Ainz. Ainz carefully examined the woman kneeling before him. Did becoming undead change her behavior in some way? Enough to require that she be chained and blindfolded? Given the fact that she continued to function as a noble of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, it couldn't have been that bad. Baroness Zaradnik. The Baroness swallowed. Yes, Your Majesty. Now that you're one of the undead, how do you feel? I feel like myself, she replied. I was confused and concerned at first, but I believe I am coming to terms with my new existence. Have you experienced any compulsions, those that might be attributed to naturally spawned undead? No, Your Majesty. I also was worried that this would be the case upon discovering my undead state, so I kept my interactions with the living to a minimum. Recently, I've determined that I am as I was as a human when it comes to my conduct around the living. Beside her, comprehension dawned on Shiltir's face. Ainz, she said. The blindfold and the collar are not a precaution against her bringing harm to others, they are for her benefit, aren't you? The collar is to keep her from fleeing, and she won't be able to see you with the blindfold on. His tenuous grasp on the situation fell apart. Now nothing made sense. Is that so? Well, as long as you can answer a few questions. Baroness Zaradnik rose to her feet, folding her hands in front of her lap. I wanted to go to Katsa Plains to find an intelligent undead, and I ended up running into one before we even got there. To top it off, they're already one of my subjects. How should I go about this? Ainz had all sorts of tests that he wanted to conduct, but she had already proven herself to be a valuable asset. He didn't want to come off as being callous. His eyes scanned the harvested vineyards along the distant riverbanks to either side. If they were where he thought they were, it was probably a good half a day before they reached the edge of the Katsa Plains. He could relax and take his time. Zaradnik Dono, he asked, how much do you know about your undead state? The noblewoman opened her mouth, then closed it again without a word. For instance, Ainz prompted, do you know what race you are? Your strengths, weaknesses and abilities? The traits inherent to what you have become? I've discovered a few, Your Majesty, Baroness Zaradnik replied, but much is still a mystery. I don't even know what I am. How foolish. The noblewoman flinched and turned her face down towards his feet. Shiltir describes you as a diligent and capable individual, he told her, yet you have not explored the extent of your own capabilities. As one who is responsible for many, should you not first understand yourself? It is as you say, Your Majesty, The baroness replied softly, "But how do I do that? It's taken over a month to discover what little I know. I would ask for assistance, but I still worry over how people might react if they discover what I am." A sense of excitement rose within him. How long had it been since he had this feeling? All of the undead he had encountered so far were at most variations of familiar mobs from Yggdrasil, but it was not apparent what Baroness Zaradnik was. Would she be something entirely new and unknown? "That is a needless worry here," he told her, "for we're all undead. It will be roughly 12 hours before we cross into the Katsa Plains. If you possess the resolve, I will help you understand what you have become."